Hello, everyone. This research workshop is an excellent initiative by the Journal of Orthopedics for people interested to carry out the research. And when you start your journey of writing a research paper, the basic structure basically is depending on the type of manuscript you will be writing, ranging from original article to a case report or an editorial. And the structure basically has these sections in it. In most of the journals would be the title, the abstract, introduction, methods, results, tables and figures, discussion. So that's how it goes, and finally conclusions, acknowledgements and references. So I'll just go one by one of these and start off with the title itself. The acronym of TRIP would be helpful to formulate your title in terms of the topic, the result, intervention, and the population which needs to be mentioned. And how concise and informative the title is very, very important. You need to add the phenomena of greatest interest for the reader. So whether it's the result, which is something new, or the intervention, which is something different. Population, of course, generally we don't really mention in terms of human subjects, but if it is involving any animals, then you specifically have to mention the population and whether your title accurately reflects the study or not. So this is a example of a title which runs as anatomical reduction, precise internal fixation, or intra-articular fractures of the distal radius with virtual X-ray and 3D printing. So the topic here is basically distal radius fixation. The results have been anatomical reduction, precise fixation. The intervention was virtual X-ray and 3D printing. Of course, it was in humans. So this is the way we can remember the acronym there. But you need to avoid things like novel or new, trying to take a lead, or rather, trying to sell that particular title by talking of these, or a study of, investigation of, observations, or avoid a title with a question also. This leads to less citations. People won't really search your study with a question mark. So you need to avoid these things and always try to put in the important word first. It's the same example if I take now here, the anatomical reduction and precise internal fixation, the emphasis is there by the authors, but actually their work is more towards virtual X-ray and 3D printing for this. So a better title would have been to put that as the first words. The virtual X-ray 3D printing is the thing which could have been highlighted by the authors. A lot of journals ask for running title, and a lot of queries come how it should be. It's a short version of the main title. If you look at the main title of the same example again, a running title would be virtual X-ray and 3D printing in internal fixation of distal radius fractures. So a lot of anatomical reduction, precise internal fixation, intra-articular, all those words can be removed and made a short running title. The other thing is the keywords. When the journals ask for 2 to 5 keywords, it's a key element again for research citations. Always use the mesh terminology, the medical heading, subheading, the medical subheadings have to be used, available in the PubMed. Try to match your keywords into the mesh terminology, or at least Google Scholars, so that it's easy for people to search. Otherwise, a lot of times the search words, the keywords might not be relevant at all. Abstract is basically having a couple of parts there. What was studied, it forms the introduction part, and why was it studied, what is your hypothesis or the question that comes in your introduction, how was it studied, the methodology there, and what was found of these the results, and what it means, basically the conclusions. So this is the most important takeaway lesson, has to be highlighted at the end of the abstract. So it could be a structured abstract like this with purpose, methods, results, and conclusions, something like this. Or some of the journals might just ask for an unstructured abstract, with basically a summary of the entire manuscript itself. Coming to introduction, it's basically, it gives the background, adequately describes the topic, and then why is the need for the study, which is the most important, the soul of the manuscript itself, as to what is your research question or hypothesis, and have others carried out similar studies. One or two major references should come here in the introduction part, and you have to identify the knowledge gap, or what is the need for the study itself, and then formulate your research question or hypothesis or your goal itself. So that forms the introduction, and then that literature review should be quite thorough, and also to be included most recent, and the content of the literature review should relate directly to the research problem itself. So basically, introduction sets the scene for the entire manuscript. It starts by telling the reader what is happening or what has happened already, and ends by giving the reader a glimpse of what follows the remainder of the article. But don't include details about methods and results or a discussion in the introduction itself. So this is again a structured abstract here, and the introduction ends basically with the purpose of this study was to present the author's surgical technique and to evaluate the surgical outcomes and efficacy. So you're trying to tell what is your hypothesis or your goal or research question. Coming to materials, where or with whom and what. So the study setting, it tells you where it was done, how was the sample size calculated, what was the inclusion exclusion criteria, very, very important, and whether it's very specific of those things. The method is how did you do the study itself. So what was the study design? Is it appropriate for your question, research question? And how was the research conducted and data collected? And subject privacy protection, ethical committee approvals, all these have to be mentioned very clearly in this section. So experimental kind of studies, then you need to check how validated were the experiments, and is it clear why each experiment was performed, and what about the samples, how were they collected, processed, and stored. That this data becomes very, very important. In a dissertation, when you have a dissertation and converting it to a thesis, into a manuscript, your methodology could be very elaborate, like how in an anthropometric study, how the height, weight, and the BMI, everything. But in a manuscript, you just have to mention that anthropometric measurements noted as per the WHO standard guidelines. So there is a change between how you would write there and how would you write in the manuscript itself. In the results and analysis, you need to very clearly mention how the data was analyzed, whether the results significant or not, and the statistical test which you chose, whether appropriate or not, very, very important. And I'll also talk about the sample size and the power of study, was it adequate or not in the result section. And what were the findings of the study? Did they answer the question of your hypothesis? And how did you interpret your results is also very important. And especially when it comes to figures and tables, don't put in too many there. See what is necessary, and then also check the numbers, very, very important, whether it adds up in your tables or graphs and other displays. Is the result presented for every objective or intervention which you thought of, is also to be noted. And when you start discussing your manuscript itself, it should start with presenting the answer to what the question was, and describe how the results are supported by other studies. That's where your literature discussion comes, to compare and contrast between the previous studies. How your results support other studies, or how the other studies support your own. And if you all you have your new findings, how can you substantiate it? Very, very important. So the literature support, you basically start with the standard textbook, original articles, and the latest papers, and includes the latest literature as well as the landmark studies for your topic. Findings that differ from previous studies, you make sure you substantiate it, and you need to describe the limitations to the study and whether these limitations might have affected the results. So generally, the manuscript ends with the limitation of the study and finally the conclusion itself. And avoid repeating the details just presented in the results, not too many numbers again in the discussion, and repeating the introduction and all background material is not necessary. Come straight to the point. Conclusions should be valid and supported by the data itself, and must relate directly to the original question or hypothesis. Basically means you're answering your aim and objectives one by one. Don't put in extent the beyond the scope of the study. Don't put in new things, or don't write philosophical statements in conclusion. There are things which you need to end with, especially conflict of interest, ethical approval, funding, informed consent, supplementary material, and of course the references as per the standard guidelines of the journal itself. So what I showed initially, the structure of a manuscript and the way you write is completely different. Here everything gets jumbled up. You actually start with the methodology. That is the most core thing of any manuscript. How strong is the methodology is what editors are looking for, and then add up why those methodology is strong by a table, figure, results, discussion, and finally come back later to check whether from all these you need to write your abstract. Abstract should not be written first, because this is the synthesis, or complete synthesis of what you've done with the entire manuscript, and then think whether your title really matches all these things. So this writing order changes. The various study guidelines, how we need to present or how we need to report, like for randomized studies, the consort guidelines, observation studies, the STRO, case reports, care guidelines. So there are many of these guidelines. This particular site website gives you the details of all these very nicely. So go along with this and check whether your manuscript matches all these things. So research is definitely a way of life, especially for academicians, for all of us. And the earlier we start developing the mindset towards this, it's always better for us to come out with very good literature support and give something new to the literature itself. Thank you so much for your attention.